Thank you, Mayor. This meeting, for which the agenda has been posted, will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, as well as state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at the city's Falls Church website, www.fallschurchva.gov/council-meeting, as well as on FCC TV, Cox Station 11, RCN 2, Verizon 35. City Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues. The public is not generally invited to speak. Public comments, however, may be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov, cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. All comments are provided in full to the members of council and will be summarized at the next regular council meeting. And Mayor, if you desire, I'll proceed with the roll call.
Please.
Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Z?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, council.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor?
Excuse me?
Mr. Mayor, this is the city clerk. I just wanted to let you know that the folks at home did not hear your introduction, so you might want to do that again. You're welcome.
All right, my welcome. All right, well, thank you. You're welcome. And I would like to go ahead and again welcome to the public to our Monday, June 15th, 2020 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you all are here with us this evening. This is a work session, as you may have heard just a moment ago. At work sessions, we generally do not have public comment. Those are at our regular meetings, which next week will be our next regular city council meeting. But you're welcome to send us any comments you might have. And that email address again is cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. We receive those comments, everyone on council does, and we look forward to hearing from the public. Why don't we now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the Retirement Board's recommendations for amending the pension investment guidelines. And before we get to that, I do have an announcement or a declaration I'd like to make, and maybe the Vice Mayor does as well, but I'd like to go ahead and do that right now. I make the following declaration before City Council's consideration of TR 20-25, which would amend the city's investment policy statements. My wife was in the past employed part-time by the Falls Church City School Board, and as a result is a participant in the city's pension plan. Therefore, I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by the approval of TR 20-25. I nonetheless can participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. I don't know if you have a similar one to read, Ms. Connolly. If you do, now would be the time.
I do. Yes, I do.
Right.
I make the following declaration before City Council's consideration of TR 20-25. In the past, I was a part-time employee of the Falls Church School Board, and as a result, I am a participant in the city's pension plan. Therefore, I am a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by the approval of the investment policy statement amendments. Nonetheless, I can participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Dave Snyder, just to make another short note. Although I'm not required to do so, my daughter is scheduled to begin employment with the Falls Church City Public Schools, and she's an adult independent, but I have no doubt that I can participate fully and impartially in these discussions. Thank you.
All right, congratulations to your daughter. That's an awesome addition to our school system, so good stuff. Mr. Shields, are you going to go ahead and do any kind of introduction, or how are we going to get to this matter?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Cindy Mester and our chair of our retirement board, Connie Rydberg, are going to give the presentation tonight. But I did just want to note for the council that that Cindy Mester is our plan administrator. You'll recall that she was our HR director that included this responsibility. And when we hired Steve Mason, we kept the pension plan administration in Cindy's portfolio, and she's done this job with great energy and diligence, which is so important for this big, important program for the city. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Cindy, if you could take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter and Mr. Shields. As Mr. Shields indicated, we are joined this evening by Chair Connie Ryberg, who is the chair of the Retirement Board, and I appreciate her joining the work session. I will just do a bit of an overview introduction and then turn it over to the chair, and then we will welcome any council's comments and questions. This is scheduled for council's June 22nd meeting for action, and the staff's recommendation is to approve the policy recommendations, the resolution that we're presenting this evening. This is a review of the investment policy statements, known as IPSs, that are used to manage and administer the basic and police pension plans, as well as our post-retirement medical benefits defined benefit plan, which in common layman term is often referred to as OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. These are both very important policy documents to help us with the staff administration of these plans, but also the work we do with our financial advisors and our actuarials. The Retirement Board closely oversees both of these policies, and as you know, the administration of the pension plans and the OPEB trust. These policies are routinely reviewed and occasionally updated. Council did update the basic and police investment policies last fall, October, and at that time it was to change the asset allocation component, which included cash component in order to accommodate the water sale proceeds. This one has quite a few changes, many of which are administrative and clarification for the administration, but there are a couple key components that are important to ensure our long-term financial sustainability of these plans. Right now, they're very good and stable and over fully funded, and certainly that is what we want to do for the program beneficiaries in the long term. And so with that, if I may, I'll turn it over to our chair to speak to some of the changes that have occurred or were being recommended that the Retirement Board approved unanimously at their last meeting, which was May 14th. And then also can speak a little bit to the recent asset allocation study commissioned by the Retirement Board. Chair Ryberg?
Hello, City Council. Yes, this is Connie Rydberg, Chair of the Retirement Board. And if I may just reintroduce myself, I've been, my day job is as a pension actuary for corporate pension plans. Been doing that for over 25 years and have been a member of the Retirement Board for the City of Falls Church for about 10 years. So in this proclamation, if I may turn you to page 2, we've outlined the changes to the investment policy statement. We have one policy statement for the pension plans and a separate one for the retiree medical or OPEB. So first I'll go through the pension plan changes and then separately through the OPEB, although there are some parallel changes between the two. So first, starting on line 28, the first change is to section 3.1 of the policy, which is regarding how we fund the pension plans. And you may recall that about $9.2 million was invested, that was the water sale proceeds, was invested in the pension plan back in 2016, and intended to be as an endowment. And so we needed to update. There's no real fundamental change to the funding of the plan other than we needed to change the language, some technical updates to just clarify and ensure that that $9.2 million remain as an endowment in the plan. As well, we updated it to reference the water sale proceeds admin manual that we have completed. That's a manual that goes through the details of how this endowment is to work, all the actuarial and investment aspects of it, which was finalized and adopted at our May 2020 meeting. So that's section 3.1. Section 3.2, we updated the outlook for our returns. This is not due to any change in the asset allocation. This is more just an update to the investment community has a different outlook on just long-term investment returns. And so we updated that reduced that down from 5% down to 4.5. Section 4.3, we updated the ethics and our conflict of interest section really to make the two policies, the retiree medical and the pension, identical. There is a whole separate ethics and conflict of interest policy that the retirement board annually reviews and confirms verbally that we will all comply with. So this is just a short abbreviated version of a much longer policy that we review. But again, we wanted to make sure that they were consistent between the two policies. And then section 12.3 just updates some of the reporting we get to clarify the reporting that we get from our active managers that is different from what we get from our passive managers. And then finally, there's some administrative changes, around dates and terminology. So those are the key changes. Those are the changes to the pension plan's investment policy statement. Down to line 56, now these are the changes for the retiree medical. Again, starting with section 3.1, this is about how we fund the retiree medical plan. And we made this consistent with our pension plans, which is we added a minimum contribution amount or a minimum contribution override. And if I can set some context here, when we added this minimum contribution override to the pension plan, this was shortly after the 2008 financial crisis. And at that time, the pension plan was, relatively well funded, and the plan had been on a contribution holiday, meaning there had been no contribution amounts for several years. And then when 2008 hit, there was sort of a double whammy, which was the city started needing to contribute money, and it was a significant amount of money. So as a retirement board, we thought it made sense and was prudent to add a minimum contribution to avoid some of this, if you will, shock to the system of high contributions and the low contributions. So we added a minimum contribution amount, which is the contribution from the city can't be less than 75% of the value of the benefits being earned during the year. Now, there is an escape clause that if the pension plan is really well funded, which we defined as 150% funded, that can be ignored and no contributions need to be made. But again, this was intended to smooth out some of the ups and downs in the contribution and build up some cushion in the event of, as we have just seen, an inevitable downturn. So that is what we added to the pension plan. We thought it was prudent to add this to the retiree medical plan. This was a decision that was made by the retirement board even before this last pandemic, and again affirmed at the May meeting as a good addition to our funding policy. On to 4.3, this is the same changes for the pension plan to streamline the language between the two policies. 6.0 is some just administrative updates around referencing to the council resolutions. Section 12.3 is the same update as for the pension plan around reporting from our investment managers, and then some administrative updates around terminology, capitalization, and dates. So those are the changes to the investment policy statements. If I may then move on to line 80, as Cindy mentioned, We did undertake, just as a regular review, our asset allocation. So this is a process where we ask our investment manager to review the risk-reward trade-offs of our investment allocation. This was again conducted pre-pandemic and planned pre-pandemic. Our outside investment manager looked at, are there other investment classes we should add? Are there changes in the mix of the investments that we have? And ultimately what we saw was there were some minor changes that could be made, may provide modest increases in returns, but also modest changes in risk. She confirmed for us that our current mix is reasonable. And as a retirement board, looking at this in May, so post all of the pandemic and the downturn in the market, we concluded that now was not the time to be updating our asset allocation, that our asset allocation was reasonable, but that certainly we are going to continue to monitor this and look at this. What we saw was, certainly the last report that we got was as of March 31st, and that was pretty much close to the bottom of the market. All of that said, from a 10-year perspective and a 5-year perspective, our managers continue to perform well. We're still in the top 5 percentile of returns in comparison to other retirement plans that are invested in sort of a similar mix. And what we're seeing is what we wanted from our managers, which is, yes, while they had a downturn in the markets or downturn in their investment portfolio values, it was not as much of a downturn as the general market. So again, what we're seeing is our investment policy and our investment managers are working as intended to protect against some of the downturn while still maintaining a long-term view towards superior returns. So with that, we just decided again to leave the asset allocation as is, but to continue to monitor. So with that, I will turn it over if there are questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for that thorough presentation and for your fine work and oversight of this very important pension plan. Are there questions or comments for Ms. Rydberg or Ms. Mester?
Mayor, I have a few.
Yes, Ms. Hardy.
So working backwards on the minimum contribution language, how well funded are we right now relative to that 150%?
So for the OPEB plan, we are actually very well funded. We are in the 130, 140% funded range. Now we have made some updates to our asset allocation, and our next measurement period point in time will be July 1st, 2020. So we were at about 130 or 140% funded for the OPEB plan, if that's what you're talking about. Are you asking about the retiree medical or the pension plans?
Both. Just while you brought up kind of how well funded we were, I wanted to know where we were relative to that 150%.
Sure. So for the retirement medical, we're at about 130, 140. With some of the changes we're going to make in the assumptions, that will come down, but we're still well over 100% funded as of July 1st, 2019. As of July 1, 2019, for the pension plans, we were at about 105% funded on a smoothed asset basis. On a market value basis, we were at about 110% funded. All of those measures for the pension plan exclude the water sale money. So we look at the funded status with excluding that endowment. So even better funded with that. Sorry?
Why do we exclude the $9 million?
We exclude it for purposes of our evaluation of how well the plan is funded, because we intend for that $9.2 million to be an endowment. And while it is in the pension plan, is it intended as a separate endowment for purposes of leveraging the investment earnings towards to paying for other projects?
I always thought the $9 million was included when we talked about how well funded things were. So with that in mind, is the minimum contribution language the same now in both plans with this amendment?
They are, yes.
So 75% of the plan's kind of cost, or?
Yep.
Okay. So I noted at the end, the fiscal impact for this year was, we didn't think there would be an impact. Can we project that obviously with budgets next year, if we adopted this new language in there, what might the fiscal impact be?
Sure. So for FY22, we don't know. So there's no impact for FY21. That amount contribution has been set.
Yep.
For FY22, it's hard to estimate. The most that it could be an impact would be around $250,000 increase. Very likely it will be close to zero. It'll all depend on the valuation of the plan at July 1, 2020.
For staff is, I want to make sure that we think about fiscal impact, not just for this year, but have an anticipation of what it might be for next year too.
Right.
Yes, we do monitor that, and as the chair indicated, it'll be July, each July when we do the valuation, then we will be able to assess that, and we're starting that process. We do also do a 5-year smoothing on the investments, and that's to also manage the volatility. But we work closely with finance, so Ms. Bawa is always updated and informed for budgeting purposes.
And not knowing enough about how pensions work, but is this pretty standard language? I know that our pension, we pride ourselves on being very well managed and well funded here, but is this language around minimum contributions and all the other amendments, is that standard? Like, where would we put ourselves versus kind of other jurisdictions? Do they have similar language and policies in place?
Cindy, I might turn to you on this one. I'm not aware of what other jurisdictions might have. Do you have any insight there?
I don't have any specific information available tonight, but I could follow up on that, Ms. Hardy, if you'd like.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions for now.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments?
I've got just a couple.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah. Connie, thank you for that report. Much appreciated. The returns that we've been able to generate, our asset allocation, I know that it's remained relatively conservative. Is that mostly index fund based? How does that asset allocation work?
Yeah, so we are about 70% in equities and 30% in bonds, which is a standard, if not slightly aggressive return seeking, I guess, if you will, asset allocation.
Mm-hmm.
The investments in the equities are active managers, and the investments in the bonds are passive. What we are seeing is that we are getting benefit from the active management on the stock side, on the equities. So we continue to look at that decision, but we continue to affirm that that has provided value to us.
And in our overall return, are we factoring in the expense of working with those active managers? Is that included in the net against that overall return?
It is, yes.
Okay, that's good. All right, excellent. And then I think along the lines of what Ms. Hardy was asking, our program in general, and in terms of our compensation, pension included, and maybe this is for Karen and Steve as well, but is this, I mean, overall, our compensation and considering our pension program, are we competitive with other jurisdictions?
Is your question competitive in terms of the pension or the overall compensation?
If you look, yeah, so it sounds like our pension language is fairly standard. It sounds like our asset allocation is probably close to what you see in some other jurisdictions, but considering our overall kind of total compensation and the way that we look at it, do we feel good that with a combination of this pension as well as kind of our salary bands and other compensation factors that we are competitive with other jurisdictions? That's a broad question.
Yeah, Mr. Lichtenhouse, that is a big question, and we probably need to get back with you with the comparison. So for the pension benefit, What you would do is do side-by-side comparisons of what that retirement benefit looks like relative to other jurisdictions. And then, on an annual, and that can be done on an annual basis. We do typically try to compare what our raises are relative to other jurisdictions. And then when we compare overall compensation, the last time we did a big compensation study was about 6 years ago, a market comparison. And at that time, it was determined we were at about the median for Northern Virginia. And our strategy going forward is to take sort of work area by, rather than doing a big comprehensive compensation study, to take smaller bites on a regular basis, so we can do some market true ups. But it's a very complex issue of how you compare that.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I could jump in, though, I will note that our pension plan design is intended to mimic what is provided from the VRS, Virginia Retirement System.
Okay.
All right.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Are there other comments or questions from Ms. Rydberg?
This is Karen. If I may add a little bit more to that response on the calculations and how we compare to other jurisdictions. So our formula and the way we process the information is very typical. Like most agencies, retirement plans do, they base it on the payroll information that they get. We do have a little caveat with the water sale, and it is to mitigate the risk that we do not include the 9.2 million in it when we calculate our funded ratio and our the health of our pension plan. So we are actually at a better place, and if we were to include the 9.2 million when in the ADC calculation, which we do not, it's just to be more on the conservative side.
Okay.
And the payroll, how it is done on a year-to-year basis is that we look at the payroll information we pass on for valuation to the auditors on an annual basis. And like, for instance, we gave a 3.25% increase last year. Then we look at the total payroll increase based on annual over information. Of course, there are vacancies, there are staff turnover, there are a lot of factors that go into it. But overall, we are within the realm of where the numbers should be. There are not that many aberrations, at least on the higher side by any means. And we monitor the data for valuations when we do it annually. And as far as the compensation study, like City Manager Mr. Shields just said, that is under the purview of the HR, and the last study was done a few years ago. And how we compare with our other jurisdictions is a task Mr. Mason will attend to once the vacancy freezes and all that stuff is addressed.
A big task, I'm sure. I mean, it does seem like we have a very robust pension fund, and it seems like our benefits are I would say, we're in a much better position, I think, than a lot of other jurisdictions, and I think that that's important to note, especially if you're not including the water fund money. My only request would be, parting here, is for the actively managed allocations, Connie, that we just continue to watch those administrative expenses. It's palatable when your returns are coming in above, but when you've got cheaper index funds and things, and we are not as competitive, that we should revisit those. But it sounds like you guys have done a good job of picking winners at this point. So thank you, and Karen, thank you for that.
And as it relates to the administrative fees and expenses, I do want to note that on a quarterly basis, I provide the retirement board an update on expenses. And then on an annual basis, at minimum, they review all of the fees. And want to reinforce what you were hearing, Council, that we have a very well-funded retirement plan. It's one of the best in the state in terms of its being fully funded and well managed, and that's a very positive benefit that we share with employees and is part of our recruitment.
Mr. Mayor, can I add one more thing? I just want to thank Ms. Ryberg.
Yes, of course.
Yes. I just want to say thank you to Ms. Redberg and the Retirement Board for all their work on this. And every time we talk about our pension investment from the water sale, I feel like I have to say thank you for making sure that it is not forgotten or lost. That was my biggest fear when we voted on that in 2016, that it would just sort of disappear into a big lot of money. And I really appreciate that they keep track of it, and we have a report on that every year so that into perpetuity we will be able to see that return. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you, Ms. Connolly. Any other comments or questions before we leave this matter?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, a couple
Yeah.
quick questions.
Sure.
I'm wondering, Ms. Mester, if you could get us 3 or 4 examples of other provisions from large and small jurisdictions in Northern Virginia on the minimum contribution language. I'd like to see how other jurisdictions are calculating that and what their numbers are. Second issue I'd like is a copy of the minutes from when we allocated that 9.2 million. I'm trying to understand what was said tonight, because it sounds like what was said tonight was that the 9.2 million is just there as sort of a safety net, and that the city the taxpayers aren't getting the benefits of that in terms of a lower contribution, because you're not considering that money in meeting the 150%. So I'm trying to figure out what's the impact on our taxpayers, because it was intended to be a benefit to taxpayers as well as to the retirement fund.
Mr. Snyder, we can certainly work to get you some MCO examples and a copy of the minutes, and I'll ask Chair Ryberg to expand upon it. But one of the benefits of the water sale proceeds, with the endowment staying in there, there are earnings every year, and per the pension plan, the city can elect to use those towards meeting the employer contribution. And that is for this current fiscal year, and the July 1st one that council just adopted the budget is $640,000 per year. And so that is the tax benefit to the citizens for the 1.5 cents on the tax rate to contribute to the pension plans. And then that, per the commitment in the plan, is then allowed funding for the capital projects. Chair, do you want to add anything to that? And then maybe Mr. Shields, who was here during the time of the 2014 deliberations.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. And there's some complicated actuarial math, so I'm going to try and keep this high level, but I also would be happy to sit down with you one-on-one, Mr. Schneider, if you'd like to. We can get into more of the details, but at a very high level, to reiterate what Cindy said, the earnings on that 9.2 million are used to sort of offset the contribution amount. We've set it up in a way so that we do not intend to tap into the 9.2 endowment amount, but the earnings on that go straight to the taxpayers as an offset to the contribution amount that we calculate. And so we've set up the actuarial mathematics behind it, the contribution calculations behind it, specifically to preserve that 9.2 million, but at the same time, take the benefit of the investment earnings on that 9.2 million to the benefit of the taxpayers, to the tune of $640,000 this year, and I think for the last several years.
But if you don't include it, let me just follow up, and forgive me, I'm familiar with property casualty actuarial science, but not your part of actuarial science. So if you included that 9 million in the calculation for the 150%, not only would you get the benefit of the investment, but you'd get the benefit of not having to make the minimum contribution. So I'm trying to understand whether we're maximizing the benefit to the taxpayers as was intended.
And I'm just taking a moment to think about the question, so bear with me. You know, in the financial statements, and I might turn this over to Mr. Shields or others, but in the financial statements, that $9.2 million is reflected and is reflected in the funded status of the plan. When we talk about the fact that we don't reflect the 9.2, it is around just how we report and how we think about the pension plan. That 9.2 million absolutely is in there and is counting toward the funded status for many measures, but as fiduciaries, we sort of set it aside because we are aware of the endowment nature of that 9.2 million. But you know,
I think Connie has answered it very well, but maybe I could just add a point. There are two things we wanted to do with this investment. One, achieve on average a 7% annual yield for the taxpayers. And two, we wanted that yield to be perpetual. So we've carved it off as a separate endowment, invested with the rest of the pension fund so that we can get that on average 7% annual yield. And we've achieved that. And by not including it in the actuarial determined contribution calculation, we keep it there forever. If we included it in the ADC, it would be burned away in 5 years, and there would be nothing left because it would artificially suppress the ADC. So keeping it as a segregated fund or sort of a notional segregation of funds within the pension fund guarantees it'll be there forever. And I think that's the sort of the crucial thing that we did, and it's kind of essential to the program.
Right, so I'm with you all the way. Where I lose you is why isn't it included in the 150% calculation? And I guess the fundamental question which I want to ask is the 150% the right number, and how do we compare to other jurisdictions? So it very much relates not to the kind of things that you're talking about, but it relates to why we're not including it in the calculation for the 150%.
and so if I may address that specifically, we're not sure if 150% is the right number. It's an item that, you know, for the pension plans, we're clearly nowhere near there because either we're 105 or 110%, but it is one of the items we intend to be studying in the next year or two to ensure that we have chosen the right number.
Right, and it's important to me because that triggers a city payment, and that's where I'm going with this. I'm just trying to, A, maintain the security of the pension system and the intended role, but there was a second intended role to maximize the use of that consistent with maintaining its security as part of the overall system to maximize the benefit to the taxpayers in terms of offsetting money we would otherwise pay. And if it's not included in the 150%, and again, this is a question I'm simply asking for further deliberation, it strikes me then that it is not achieving that benefit. The fact then that we are maybe and are likely under the 150% will trigger a city payment, which can only come from the taxpayers. So what I'm just trying to figure out is, are we getting the maximum taxpayer result consistent with the security element of what we voted on? And that's why I asked, what are other municipalities doing? Is the 150% unusual? Is it high? Is it low? What is it compared to other jurisdictions? And then not including the 9.2 million struck me as a bit odd in terms of calculating the 150%. So anyway, those are the questions, and I look forward to more discussion and the documents as I've requested. And thank you very much for everyone's work on this.
And I will note the minutes will be easy to provide by next Monday. The research may take me a little bit longer. And then any policy recommendation would need to run through the retirement board in their next quarterly scheduled meeting, September. So my ask for council's consideration is to still continue to adopt these policies as recommended by the retirement board at your next Monday's meeting, so we maintain consistency in policy and good financial sustainability. And as the chair indicated, we'll continue to research this and bring it back as appropriate to council. And these are good questions, and we appreciate the detailed review of our policies.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments before we leave this matter? I'd just like to quickly ask on section 3.2 return, it says the actuarial assumption for the annual rate of inflation for generating an asset allocation return is reduced from 5 to 4.5%. What does that mean again?
Oh, I should clarify, the language is that the return that we earn on our investments above inflation is targeted to now be 4.5% instead of 5%.
I see. So this is above inflation. Inflation is 2.5%, then 4.5 gets you to 7. And if it's 2.5 or if it's 2, then you're looking for 6.5%.
That's
So
correct.
this is essentially like real return. You know, it's above inflation.
That's right.
Okay. All right. That's the only question I had. Thank you again for your fine work, and we look forward to seeing you again coming up here real soon.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, council, and thank you, Chair River.
All right. Let's move on to the next item. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. The next item is an amendment to the proffered rezoning for the Southgate property, and Akita Ruzzi is our staff lead on this, and she will give the staff report on this. I will just note by way of introduction that I think the initial view of this project was that it was a by right use in the B3 zone. However, after further looking at it, we did determine that because of the proffered rezoning that the Falls Church obtained from the city council in 2001, that rather than being that by right use, what was needed was to go back and amend the proffers. And so that is the process that we are now bringing before council. And I just wanted the council to be aware of that history of our discussion on this, that this is a commercial use that would normally be a by right use in B3 zones, but because of the legacy of that proffered rezoning, we have this process. Akita Ruzzi's been working that. Let me turn it over to her for a staff report.
Good evening. I'll just briefly highlight the staff report before you tonight. This is a rezoning application for 2 properties on the south side of East Fairfax Street between Douglas Avenue and South Washington Street. The parcels include 116 and 130 East Fairfax Street. These are both commercially zoned properties currently owned by the Protestant Episcopal Church. As Mr. Shields just said, in 2003, these properties were rezoned from OD official design to B3 under proffered conditions to facilitate development of a multi-purpose educational campus for the church. That project was never constructed, and the approved site plan expired back in 2004. Pursuant to our zoning code, as well as the Code of Virginia, once proffered and accepted as part of an amendment to the official zoning district map, such proffers continue in effect until a subsequent rezoning changes the zoning of the property covered by such conditions. As such, the current zoning designation for these properties is proffered B3, which essentially restricts the development of the properties to the 2003 approved development plan. Fairfax One LLC is currently leasing both properties and has a development proposal submitted to the city to construct a commercial building for a children's play gym on 130 East Fairfax parcel. So the main purpose of this current rezoning application is simply to remove the existing proffered development plan currently governing the property to allow the new development plan proposed by Fairfax One LLC. Mr. Young is with us this evening representing Fairfax One LLC and the church, and would like to provide a presentation. But before I turn it over to him, I'd like to provide a quick summary of the project and approval process. For a quick summary of this, the proposed project, the applicant, as I mentioned, Fairfax One LLC is the developer, and the Episcopal Church is the owner and the applicant on the rezoning application. Application before the City Council is for a conditional rezoning, which means the development will be subject to proffers. In this case, since the proposed use is a by right use in the city's business districts, the proffers will be minimal to include a list of improvements already shown on the development plan and a list of prohibited uses to ensure the quality of commercial uses are provided on the site. Development site, the rezoning application includes both 116 East Fairfax and 130 East Fairfax Street, but the proposed development is on 130 East Fairfax, which is the surface parking lot. There's currently a shopping center, Southgate 1, with multiple commercial tenants on 116 East Fairfax, the adjacent property. A project entails approximately 12,000 square feet of commercial development on the existing surface parking lot there. Proposed use is a children's play gym called Scramble, and I'll let the applicant speak more on the use. The Alexandria location has a cafe and a retail section within the facility, and a similar model is proposed here. Proposed height is 1.5 story with mezzanine, also 33.6 feet, including the parapet. In terms of approval process, the applicant applied for a rezoning under the conditional zoning from a zoning district map amendment and included proffers in their application. Proffers are voluntary conditions offered by an applicant that limit or qualify how the property in question will be used or developed. Proffers are made under terms of conditional zoning to mitigate the possible negative effects of an unrestricted zoning. Upon approval, the proffers become part of the zoning and run with the land. The conditional rezoning process requires 2 readings, a public hearing for Planning Commission recommendation, and final legislative action by council on the ordinance. A general project schedule is provided at the end of the staff report. First reading and referral to Planning Commission and the Tree Commission is scheduled for July 13th. And just quickly, application review and status. The first submission of the rezoning application, just provided in attachment 1 and 2 of the staff report, was received on March 26th and includes a justification statement, development plan, and a proffer statement. Staff reviewed the submission and issued comments to the applicant on April 21st. Those staff comments letter is provided in the attachment 4 of the report and includes several minor items intended to help refine the application. Of particular note, the current application does not include both properties for the rezoning request as it should, and the applicant was asked to address this in their second submission for a complete application. Tonight, staff is asking council's initial feedback to the applicant on their first submission. The applicant intends to submit a revised application following the council work session in response to comments received from staff and any comments received from City Council tonight. An updated proffer statement provided in attachment 6 was received on June 10th, just before the report was posted. Staff will provide an evaluation of the revised application along with these updated proffers based on the comprehensive plan, zoning code, and other relevant city regulations, part of the staff report for July 13th. That's all I have, and I can turn it over to Mr. Young for his presentation, and happy to take any questions.
All right, why don't we hear from Mr. Young, and then we'll come back to you for additional questions, Ms. Ruzzi.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
We can. Welcome, Mr. Young.
Thank you. I'll keep my presentation very brief. Akita has given you all of the specifics. As you can imagine, this development came as a great surprise to us. We thought that we had worked out an agreement that was a by right use, as she mentioned. Never occurred to us that proffers from 20 years ago almost would come into play, but they have. We think that the proposed building, which is about 12,000 square feet and about 26 feet tall, we have a signed lease with the Go Scramble folks who have an operation in Alexandria. One or more of you may have been there. It was before COVID-19 a very successful operation. They're coming back into operation now. The owner of that company is very deep into how he operates his business. It's very oriented to doing things that are quite different from kind of a normal kids' playhouse. Very oriented to the science, very oriented to cleanliness, even more so now. He has a bistro of sorts in Alexandria with an area primarily for parents, but not exclusively, to, you know, serve coffee and cappuccino and baked goods and pizza and things like that. He intends to upgrade that substantially in the Falls Church operation. We think he will be very successful. Part of our agreement with the church, we went through, pardon me, quite a long process to make sure that they were on board. The church has the right to use the parking lot on Sunday mornings for obvious reasons. And one of the things we provided for is that all of the children of members of that church can use the facility at no cost during, well, basically from 8:30 to 12:30 on Sunday mornings. We think that will be a big benefit to the church. They think so as well. We think this will be a great improvement on that property, which at the current time is not taxed. It's dirty. That is, there's no stormwater management. A lot of water runs off of there, and it's not cleaned or controlled in any way. We have quite an elaborate stormwater management proposal to meet current DMPs. We've also included in our proffers things such as bump outs on East Fairfax in order to facilitate pedestrian traffic going back and forth between that property and the church proper. We may get into a discussion of some of those details. So we think this is a very reasonable request. Effectively, we're rezoning from B3 to B3. And as Akita pointed out, it's really a proffered condition amendment, but we don't have that in our lexicon in Falls Church City, so it has to be a rezoning. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Young. Thank you, Ms. Rusi. Are there questions for either the applicant or staff?
Nikita?
All right, go ahead.
What else can go in B3? Nikita, can you hear me?
I missed that. Could you repeat? Sorry.
What else could go in B3? So it sounds like this business is very well regarded and hopefully stays in business, but what else could go in B3? Should it not work out?
Yeah, general service, retail. B3 actually has a long list of principal uses permitted in that zoning.
Let me just point out, if I may, that there's also a long list as part of the proffers of uses that would not be permitted. They're proffered out, if you will. Staff has been, well, we started with the church in our negotiations. They had a long list of uses that they wanted to be sure we would not include ever. And then staff had additional items. The one that stands out to me is automobile uses. So I'm sure it's in your packet somewhere, it's probably a thick packet, but there's a rather long list of items that are permitted in the B3 that would not be permitted on this property under the proffers.
Thank you for Mr. Young, because that's actually where I was going to go. It's our attachment 6, the updated proffers. I just had a question for staff, whether we've paired that up, because I feel like we've looked at this list several times with the past couple development projects. If we've paired that up with the most recent one, which I guess might have been Broad in Washington from 2 years ago.
We can do that. Yeah, some of these things are pretty common in the most recent VCs we've seen with the Broad and Washington Founders Row, like the drug and tobacco related uses and firearm. And we can look at that closely.
Great, thank you.
I've got a couple questions, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you guys for this presentation. Bob, I'm sure I can understand your frustration of going through this and realizing there's a 20-year-old proffer sitting on what was a by right development. So it does raise some interesting questions about the development itself. I was taking a look at the plans. The ingress egress between the adjacent retail property, is that going to be aligned to allow folks to go from the development next door into the parking lot of this new development?
To the extent it can be, yes. We facilitated as well as we can. You'll easily be able to get from one to the other.
Okay. And are you guys doing anything in terms of meeting the standard streetscape requirements that we have?
Yes.
No special exception?
We're replacing the entire row of landscaping along East Fairfax. The city arbor, even though it looks good to us and it looks good to the church, it was felt that that included a lot of invasive species and over mature trees. So that will all be taken out. I don't recall, perhaps Akita can tell me, I don't believe we have brick sidewalks, but we definitely have sidewalks along East Fairfax.
Okay. How many parking spaces are you leaving at that site? Because as you'd mentioned, and I know you've been working very closely with the church on this, but there have been some alternative uses of that parking lot in the past, whether it's a mulch sale or other types of fundraisers. Have you guys thought through that in your conversations with the church?
That's been the subject of a great deal of discussion. We're reducing the number of parking places. Akita has the exact numbers and I don't have them in front of me. I believe we're reducing the number because of the footprint of the building by about 15. But then what we have done is compensated for those by giving the church on Sunday mornings the right to park in the shopping center, the adjacent shopping center, which heretofore they haven't had that right. Because most of the uses there, of course, are closed on Sunday morning, with a couple of exceptions.
Okay.
Also, we've obtained the approval of Doris Newcomb, who owns the shopping center to the rear, and she's given us written permission for the church to use the parking behind her shopping center on Sunday mornings.
Okay. And then Bob, can you guys tell me what you're doing to mitigate the stormwater runoff? I know that you said it's going to be a vast improvement. That is a fairly dirty site. We've got a couple of those around town. I'm just curious from my own edification what you guys are doing to mitigate that as part of this redevelopment.
Well, actually, there are alternative plans on the table right now. Obviously, in the end, Public Works will have to approve what we do. It will either be bioretention planters, fairly large number of them, or an underground retention that has filters so that we can reduce the nitrogen and retain the water and, meter it out in larger storms.
Okay. And then just two additional requests. First, as liaison of the Urban Forestry Commission, I would ask that you consider planting, as many trees as you can, do as much as you can with native plantings to help mitigate that stormwater runoff, in addition to what you guys are doing with the bioretention. Secondly, in conversations, and I'm sure you've been in close contact with him, with Father Andy Anderson, who's the interim pastor over at the church. There have been some requests, and I don't think this is new, but there have been some requests about traffic calming on that street for the day school over there. I see that you guys have added a few crossings. Is there anything else that you guys are doing specifically to help calm traffic along that street in conjunction with this development? Because it is quite dangerous, even if you're walking in between those developments. And I've certainly done it, been over there to Bake Shop and Audacious Ale Works. Is there anything that you guys are doing as part of this redevelopment that's going to help mitigate that?
Well, what we're doing the bump outs. We're adding 2 mid block crossings, pedestrian crossings. We had proposed a speed bump, a large speed bump similar to the one over on, I think it's Spring Street, by the Catholic Church. And public.
Are those, Bob, are those raised crosswalks?
No, they're not raised crosswalks because Public Works won't let us do that. We want to put in a speed bump. Public Works is opposing one of the 2 mid-block crossings. You'll see in the staff report that they're opposed to that because it makes the crosswalks too close together in their view. I find that preposterous from a safety point of view, but that's what we're faced with. And in the end, council will have to decide whether to accept that recommendation from Public Works. I, of course, would be delighted, and the church would be delighted, if council decided that having a speed bump in place of one of those crosswalks, a combination, obviously, of the 2, as was permitted over at St. James, but we're not permitted, and we're told that it has to do with stormwater management. I fail personally to see why it's okay on one street but not on the other.
Okay.
That nobody's been able to or been willing to explain that.
Okay. Yeah. From a to staff, Wyatt, Nikita, and others. I mean, I would urge us to reconsider at least making. And I'm looking at the development plan now, the one that basically intersects the development across East Fairfax. Maybe that could be raised. I think that's an important crossing and one that folks use a lot for a bunch of different reasons. And so if that's a raised crosswalk that we can make that will help slow traffic and also make it a more of a prominent crosswalk, I'd recommend that we put that into this approval if it does pass. I think that's it's an important addition. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, Phil?
Yes, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. I'd like to chew on that bone just a little bit longer, but first, seems like a very exciting business and very commendable for the developer to have worked with the neighbors on parking. I think parking will be okay, particularly with the spaces in the back of Tower Square on Sundays. That's a real good example of working cooperatively with existing landowners to address the parking issue. But there on East Fairfax Street, yeah, reading Zach's comments, I would just, maybe we could all go do a little walk along the street there. The things that are going to be added there, whether it's speed humps or crosswalks or both, seem likely to cut down on the number of on-street parking spaces on that stretch. We learned on Hillwood Avenue that when we install new, up to standard crosswalks, we can lose some considerable acreage of current parking. And I would like us to obviously make it a safe street. Crosswalks would be good. Speed hump seems to me like would be good. But we also would like to do that. I would like to do it in conjunction with preserving as much on-street parking there as we can. So hopefully we can all get together and swim in the same direction on this and end up with a safe street for pedestrians that also preserves as much on-street parking as possible, because I think that'll help all the businesses as well as the church. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Other questions, comments? I've got a couple if folks are done. Does anyone else have anything before I get started? So let me ask you, I'm looking at the plan. It's a little hard to read. It's a little busy. Is there a sidewalk in front of this along East Fairfax Street?
This is Karen White from Walter Phillips. I'm here as well, so I can answer some of these questions.
Okay, Karen.
Hey, hello. There is a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk along East Fairfax Street.
So that's existing to remain?
Correct.
Okay, and so is the curb line basically staying the same there?
Yes, just where the bump outs are occurring, obviously we're narrowing the street, but besides that, yes, the curb is staying in the same location.
Okay, and so there are bump outs at the corner, and it looks like there's one on the other side of Douglas Avenue, is that right?
That's just
striping.
That's just striping. You'll see there's a curb inlet there, so putting a bump out there is a little more complicated, so we're showing just the striping to kind of, narrow the pedestrian crossing, but not actually move the curb.
Okay, and then the other bump out is sort of mid-block or mid-project, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and what does that narrow it down to? It's a little hard to read. Looks like is it 32 feet or 22 feet?
22 feet.
Okay, so 22 feet. And Bob, you talked about the parking. I was looking at the plans at the time. So right now, is this property sort of essentially parking for the church? Is that what it is, sort of 24 hours a day? A big open?
Pretty much, yes. Yes.
Okay, so it's sort of an existing lot for the church when they have an activity, an event, or obviously church on Sundays. And how many parking spaces are there now?
Karen, can you answer that?
Yes. So I know we are proposing 39, but let me quickly, I don't have that number real quickly. I can figure that out though, if you just give me a second here.
So, but essentially, I presume it's less now with the building on here than there was before, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and I think you had mentioned earlier that you've now agreed that the church can use the parking on the shopping center next door during church services, and they're satisfied with that?
Yes, and also don't forget Doris Newcomb allowing the use of her parking lot on the rear of her shopping center at the same time.
Got it. And let me just ask staff, do you all feel that this parking arrangement is satisfactory for the church's needs?
Yeah, we've actually asked for additional information in that staff comments letter just to make sure the current parking spaces on that lot is not meeting required parking for the church. I believe based on our assessor's page, the property was actually acquired by the church from the Newcomb property in 2005. So we'll have to look at that. We've asked for more information to make sure it's not required parking for the church.
Okay, good, thanks. Let me ask either Wyatt or Carol, because, and Bob, you own this, or you don't really own it, but you're a ground lessee, correct? The church is the owner, you're a long-term tenant of the property, and then you're reletting it to the gym, is that right?
That's correct.
So let me ask Carol or Wyatt, would this property be subject to tax in that ownership regime, to city tax?
Yes.
You bet.
So it's taxed, is it taxed right now?
Yes, because it's not in a church use. And so it has been taxed, I believe, for the duration.
So it's taxed currently, essentially as its current use of a lot or something like that, a parking lot?
That's correct.
Okay, and so once the improvements are constructed, the business commences presumably in the next January 1, this will be assessed as if they were fully in kind of private hands, not through a church at all. Is that right?
The short answer is yes. When you say fully, there might be some nuance because of the ground lease, but I think for all intents and purposes, yes.
Okay.
If I may just jump in for a moment. We haven't noticed any nuance from the assessor on the shopping center. It's, shall we say, fully taxed. The parking lot, I had thought we weren't paying tax on that because it's in use by the church. If we are paying tax on it, the church isn't. It's our responsibility under the lease, but it would be a pretty minimal amount. I don't know what it is. And would then be substantially, by some millions, the assessed value would be increased and taxed in full, along with stormwater.
So Carol, can you just confirm, Carol McCroskey, that there's no nuances to the to the church being the fee owner of the property for purposes of taxing of any kind?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to just look at that and verify, but I believe that's correct, but let me get back to you all on that.
Okay, that's great. And then Bob, I noticed somewhere in here, there's talk about solar panels. Was that right, or am I thinking of something else?
No, that's correct. We have agreed to put up solar panels. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I think it's around 30 or 35% of the electricity used will be provided by the solar panels. We're somewhat restricted for other reasons on putting more on, cost not being the least of them. In addition, this will be a very green building in the sense that it'll have heavy insulation. We expect the electric bill on the property to be minimal, basically, and that's kind of part of our agreement with the Scramble folks.
And Bob, are you going to be lead anything on this project?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to be lead certified, silver, gold, platinum? Are you going to have any lead certification?
No, we're not.
Okay. I imagine some folks on this call would love for you to be lead something or other. Is that something you would give any thought to agreeing to any kind of lead certification?
Well, we've given a lot of thought to it. As you know, the young group has a good track record in that regard. The problem is our costs to do the project have ballooned very, very substantially. We discovered that the parking lot is on uncontrolled fill, all of it. So we'll have to go down 7 or 8 feet, likely remove soil and replace it. There's also a copper radio array which grounds the antenna next door. We'll be breaking that array and we'll of course have to replace it. Those are just a couple, the delay alone, which has now been many, many months, is costly in itself because we're liable for rent. And we don't want to go ask our landlord, the church, to do what a lot of our tenants are asking us to do at the present time. So, yeah, we just have not been able to go in that direction. If we were to try to do any kind of LEED certification, it would delay us by many, many months. And as you all know, it's expensive.
And
Even on a simple building.
let me ask you, are there any utilities you're undergrounding, or any wires coming down, or any poles coming down as part of your redevelopment?
I don't believe so, but Karen, can you address that?
There are not, but I believe everything, there's a lot of equipment there today that's remaining. I believe a lot of the equipment is underground today.
Okay, I mean, my recollection, I don't have it totally in my mind, is it has sort of an industrial feel to it. And it would be great to sort of soften this site up a little bit. I mean, it doesn't look like you have any street trees proposed, but I would love to find a way to get some trees out front there somehow, in some fashion or the other. It's such a pretty view up at the church, and so if we could find a way to throw in a few street trees, I think that would be a nice addition somehow or the other.
We have those included. They're not street trees per se, but the entire site on both Douglas and East Fairfax will have pretty heavy landscaping.
Are they trees, or what is it there?
Trees, shrubs, flowers, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I'm looking for that sheet. I'm not sure I'm seeing that sheet.
So if you see a sheet 402, it'll show you what we're proposing.
4 of 2?
Oh, sorry, 402. See,
Oh, 402.
It's a conceptual landscape.
Yeah, okay, let me see if I can find 402. I don't want to keep everybody here. I guess let me just say, instead of me fishing for this while everybody's waiting, I would just say that to the extent you're able to create a street tree feel, staff and company, I think that would be most appreciated. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't see the sheet real quick, but I don't want to keep everybody.
Mr. Mayor, it's page 8 of the PDF, and they've got street trees along East Fairfax and Douglas.
Okay, yeah, again, I'm not...
And when we come back, we can make sure we have an exhibit that clearly show what we're proposing.
Great. All right, listen, that's all I've got. Anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I just one quick question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Hey, Bob, with everything going on, it sounds like you've been in good contact and conversation with the tenant. I mean, is this deal locked in? Are you guys ready to go?
We've been ready to go for 4 months.
And so Go Scramble is still locked into this deal. They just need to get this through approval and special exception proffer?
They have spent over $100,000 to date on their plans, deposits, solar panels, all that kind of thing.
And if they can't perform or they can't sign a deal, given what's going on in the market, you guys feel confident that you'll be able to find a replacement tenant with this use?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Hey, this is Dan. I think it's a very good project, and even though Bob says he's not applying for LEED certification, I think most of the stuff that he's doing would conform to that, which is in that general envelope. He just doesn't get that pretty plaque. You know, Bob is a modest man. If he doesn't want a plaque, that's on him. He's given us the impression that time is of the essence. And we should believe him at that. He's got the financing, and yes, we recognize that we're going from far right to a rezone to rezoning. That's given him a chance to reflect on what the city values are and encourage those aspects as well. And I would recommend that we move ahead of the project as quickly as we can. Because this is a good project. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I do have one additional question. I apologize for belaboring this. This is a question for staff. At some point in the future, if this property is purchased, and again, I'm just talking about the mechanics of how this has played out now that we've had to go back and revisit this because it's not by right. If at some point this is purchased in the future, and it is put forth as a potential redevelopment for some other use outside of what it's allowed for now, is this still a typical special exception kind of process, or does this complicate things for us?
I think we're sort of crossing that bridge now because there were some proffers and then it was tied to the use that was approved back in 2003. We're having to do this again. But if it's not a use proposed under the prohibited use, then I think we should be okay. But the proffers would still govern the property because they run with the land.
Right, but the proffers that are being proposed are fairly general and are simply excluding some B3 uses, but do not require that this exact project be built. And so they allow a lot more flexibility. If somebody came in with a different proposal, and I think this is exactly what Akita said, as long as it isn't a prohibited use, it would be allowed to be constructed under this zoning so long as it met the proffers, which are general at this point.
Let me rephrase it just one other way, just to make sure that I'm clear. Let's say that Go Scramble signs a 10-year lease. The property is sold before that 10-year lease is up. We reach that 10-year period. Go Scramble is no longer interested in staying there. The property has been sold. Someone decides that they'd like to propose a mixed-use development of some sort, something outside of what has been contemplated here. Does what we are contemplating right now and what we are considering right now complicate a potential future development?
Well, one would have to look at the proffers and make sure that the future development complied with them. But that being said, the proffers that are being that are part of this proposal are pretty general, and so would allow for quite a number of different uses. But you'd have to look at the specifics of each one to make sure it wasn't a prohibited use, or if there was some other proffer in there.
Okay. But Carol, doesn't the first proffer tie it to the conceptual plan that's before us?
Thank you, Dave.
Well,
that's the point I was going to make.
All right, if it is, and I apologize, I haven't looked at these proffers. If it does tie it to the conceptual plan, then yes, then they wouldn't be able to build in the future. I understood that the proposed proffers did not have that, but only created some prohibited uses.
Okay, I just want to be able to provide ourselves with some flexibility, given that this is a fairly unique circumstance, because I had heard about this development, it was by right, and now that we've had to reconsider this is, I call it more of a technicality than anything. I want to make sure that the mechanism that we're using right now is not going to tie our hands. If at some point in the future, there's a development that maybe it includes affordable housing, I don't know, but something else is contemplated for this property 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I want to make sure that we have not tied our hands in that regard.
Ross, I think the way this would work is 30 years from now, somebody has a new proposal, they'd come in for another amendment, and the amendment would include a conceptual plan, just like we have before us today. And
Right.
they would seek city council's approval of that new conceptual plan.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'm good. That's the answer I was hoping for.
Okay, and Carol, you can, I just draw your attention to the first proffer. I know you don't have them in Arlington, and we don't have them in Falls Church
Right.
very often, but if you can, when you get a chance, take a look at the first one. That's how I read it. But if you have a different interpretation, we'd certainly love to hear that.
No, I think that's correct. I would because I see that proffer now, we just need to look at the 7-sheet plan itself. And I will take a look at that. And if there's something different, I'll let you know.
So if I may just clarify, our
Yes,
understanding of the rezoning is if it were approved and the subsequent site plan were approved, it would permit us to build that building and only that building, and would permit, obviously, the initial use, but down the road, as has been suggested, the scramble goes away, and we want to put another tenant in there 10 years from now or whatever, then we could do that, but only within the list of permitted uses. And any other, whether it be affordable housing or any other building, would have to come back to council for approval.
That's how I understand it as well. Like, in other words, what we're doing right now with this proffer amendment is tying it to the conceptual plan, those 8 sheets that we were provided as far as the physical structure is, how it's going to look, and the like. And then the uses are through the permitted uses, which is section 2 of the proffers. So that regulates the use, and the physical attributes of the building are through the conceptual plan, which is the first paragraph in the proffers.
Yes.
So, but Carol, if you have any different interpretation upon further reflection, let us know. But that's how I read this, and maybe it sounds like how the applicant does it as well.
I think that's right. I guess what I was looking at was the fact that I think that, yes, the building is in there, but it's fairly general. The uses are any uses in B3 except for the ones that are listed as prohibited. So a number of uses could be made of that same building and probably be in compliance, but we'd have to look at the specifics in the future.
I tell you what, maybe you could do, Carol, is next time we have a meeting on this, is just as part of the staff report, somebody include the list of permitted uses in B3, so that we can have our own. I imagine there's not going to be much conflict, but there may be some other new things, a vaping shop or something like that, that aren't listed in the prohibited uses here, but that people would want to prohibit. And not to belabor it now, but maybe just for the next go, we can have a list of permitted uses in B3.
Okay.
All right. Anything else before we move on to our next item on the agenda?
Akita, while we're on those uses, I asked for this at the beginning, but I would like to be able to match up the excluded uses with the latest iteration that we've had as well.
Will do. We'll provide that for the next staff report. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? If not, thank you, Ms. Rusi, and thank you, Mr. Young, and we will be sure talking plenty more to you. So thank you all for coming out this evening electronically.
Yes,
Very well.
City Clerk. Can we test and see if Vice Mayor Conley can speak? She had a little bit of technical difficulty.
She's welcome to speak. I haven't heard her trying to speak.
No, I was out for a while. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right. I'm back. Very good.
Thanks.
Okay, did you have anything on this project? Are you okay as far as question-wise goes?
No, I'm okay on this project. Thank you for everyone else's questions.
Okay, great. Well, listen, unless there's anything else, thank you all again for presenting this item, and we will be talking to you soon.
Yes, you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to the city manager's report. Mr. Shields? Remember, we do have a closed session later tonight, so I just point that out to everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. I'd like to take time during the manager's report to allow Steve Mason to talk with the council about a proposed structure and timeline and scope of work for carrying out the mayor's pledge that was signed last week with the full backing of the city council and with their police chief. And Chief Gavin is on the line as well to join the discussion, but Steve Mason put together an outline of how we could conduct this work, and I thought it might be good for you to hear from him directly. I did want to also just note for the council that I have asked Steve Mason, our HR director, to be our staff lead to help coordinate the work of this review of the city's use of force policies and procedures and practices, and want to thank him for that, and just note that I think it is helpful to have someone outside the department serve as their liaison and our coordinator for this group and our staff lead. And Steve comes at this work with a lot of experience as a career police officer, as a trainer with the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy, and with his work as after he left his police work as a senior investigator with the Fairfax County Office of Human Rights. He just brings a lot of, I think, perspective and experience to this work. And also, just before I turn it over to Steve, I just want to thank all of the members of the community who have reached out to us with questions or with wisdom. And we really appreciate that outreach during this time. And also want to thank our Chief Gavin, who has responded, I think, so openly and honestly to that community outreach, and also with all of the members of our police department. And I think people really have appreciated her work on this, and I know I have. And I'll just note, my last words before I turn it over to Steve is to note that we have been working on these issues for a long time. The use of force, as the mayor stated in his statement last week, is such a serious and solemn power that government has. It is the most serious and solemn power that government has, and it's something that we think about a lot in the law. I say our police department thinks about a lot and talks about a lot, and this process that I think we've envisioned with the council and the mayor have set us on with a public review of these policies can only be healthy and ultimately end us up in a good place with our community and with our police department working together. So that's I think the mindset and the thinking behind it. And so let me turn it over to Steve to walk us through this proposal and get council feedback on it.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of the City Council. Can you see me okay and hear me okay? Because I was having some connection issues earlier as I did the last meeting.
I can see you just fine and hear you just
Great.
fine. I presume my colleagues can as well. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much. I did, first of all, it is an honor for me to represent the city manager in chairing this, or not chairing, but in being the staff on this commission or committee, whichever one the city council decides to name it. These are some very difficult times that we are in right now. And before I started, I did want to read something from the Obama Foundation's Commit to Action. And it says, we can take steps and make reforms to combat police violence and systematic racism within law enforcement. Together, we can work to redefine public safety so that it recognizes the humanity and dignity of every person. Mayors and other city council officials are uniquely positioned to introduce common sense limits on police use of force. And that is the precept behind this mayor's pledge. And I'd like to now go into the draft. And again, it is just a draft, so it is for your consideration. But there are 4 action items that the mayor's pledge consists of. First of all, it's the review of police use of force. And in doing that, I have asked the police department to be prepared to provide with it for at least 5 years worth of reports of incidents that have officially been reported to the police department. And again, this will be, all this information will be provided to the committee or the commission once you decide who you want to be on that commission or committee. The second thing would be to engage the communities by including a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories in review. So we would have a call to the community and we would ask for incidents or situations that they'd like to report to us. And the biggest issue with this is that we have to be willing to hear what the community says and in turn be willing to offer solutions for these particular problems. The next thing is to report the findings of the review to the community and to seek feedback. So once we've collected all this information, what this commission would first of all, it would submit a report to the city manager and the chief of police for their consideration, because I think it's very important that internally we understand what this report will entail. And then once they've had an opportunity to review, then a report will be made to city council as well as to the community. And the last thing is, and probably the most important and probably the most time consuming, the one that will take the longest amount of time, is to reform the police use of force policies and procedures. So although this draft talks about a 90-day time period, because that's the time period or the timeline that the foundation has set forth to at least talk about progress and to report on what departments are doing so far, I believe that this process will be long-term in nature. As you can see, if you want to review the document, I've had the following steps will be taken in the commission and the committee's establishment. First of all, with the statement of purpose, we won't change that. That will be the same as the pledge itself. I recommend that there be 12 commission or committee members. I also recommend that each city council member appoint one citizen to represent the diverse strata of the community. And again, we can use a call to community for that as well. I know you have heard from a lot of citizens or residents, and therefore they should be considered as well. I would also ask that the police department appoint one representative from command staff and one representative from the rank and file, hopefully a sergeant or below, which they've already reported that they have done that, so I have those names. I also want to include the sheriff's office in this process, because once individuals are incarcerated, there are incidents of use of force, sometimes excessive use of force in that arena as well. So their voice needs to be heard in regards to that arena. I will ask the city manager that Wyatt Shields appoint one non-public safety department director to serve on the panel or on the commission. I will serve as the not the chair, I was going to say as the chair, but as staff for the commission or the committee, and I will have, my only involvement will be to staff the commission. And then I also recommend that the group should be formed no later than June 30th of this year. As far as meetings, dates, and times, and locations, and frequencies of the meetings to be discussed, will be determined at the first meeting. And due to the pandemic crisis, I'm sure that most of these meetings may be virtual in nature. However, one aspect of the commission that I would like to, and I hope that the chief of police will opine in regards to this, and that is I would like for this commission to be able to participate in some simulation training at the firearms range in Fairfax City, so they can be placed in the situations that officers are placed in, particularly when it comes to split-second decisions that have to be made. As I had already said, as far as the timeline, the Obama Foundation has a 90-day timeline to release a report listing what cities are doing and their progress, and I would like for this committee to work within that 90 days with 30-day benchmarks. I know it is an aggressive timeline. However, I think it is important that we really hit this hard right now with the idea that the reform and other changes that may or may be coming will be long-term in nature. So in regards to the review of the police use of force, the police department has agreed to provide the commission or the committee, first of all, reports of use of force incidents over the last 5 years, copies of the department's use of force policies and procedures, and as Wyatt said earlier, the department has been working on updating its use of force policies and procedures over the last few years. So this should not be a difficult lift as far as reviewing the policies and procedures. I would also like for copies of the lesson plans for the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy be delivered as well for this for the committee to review. And then with that being said, I want representatives from the police department and the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy to present department and training academy philosophy regarding the use of force. Next, in regards to engaging the community, we would offer the Falls Church community an opportunity to submit stories or meet with the commission and committee during a scheduled commission or committee meeting, and then report the findings of the review to the committee and seek feedback. The commission or the committee will create an administrative report, and I want to emphasize that this is an administrative report. It is not to review as far as possible criminal charges are concerned. So this is an administrative report to present to the city manager and Chief Mary Gavin. And then after their review and comments, the commission will make a presentation to city council at a later date and possibly the community at a public invited forum. And then feedback will be considered as the commission committee considers possible changes to police use of force policies and procedures. And last, reform police use of force policies. And again, based on the results of this work, recommendations to change the police department's use of force policies and procedures, if necessary, will be presented to the city manager and chief of police. And after their review and comments, the recommendations, which may include fundamental changes to the police department's mission, vision, and values, will be presented to the city council. So that is my draft at this time, and I welcome any questions that the council may have.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Mason. Clearly a lot of thought and consideration has gone into this draft. I'm going to go ahead and open it up now to council for questions, comments, or requests. Does anyone have any thoughts on what you've heard so far this evening?
Mayor, I do.
Yes, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. First of all, Steve, thank you. This is excellent. Thank you for taking this so seriously and producing such a thorough and thoughtful recommendation. Appreciate you kind of hearing the community's call for us to take action and moving so quickly on this. Couple thoughts and suggestions perhaps. On the scope, I think as the Vice Mayor has also suggested in the past, besides having a sheriff's office member as part of the committee, can we more formally bring in the sheriff's policies and procedures into the scope of this need to tackle?
Yes, that's not a problem.
Because I like that we're including them there, but I want to make sure that it's not just police use of force, but the sheriff department is included as well.
And also, I just want you to understand that the sheriff's office, their members also attend the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy. So therefore, the foundation for the use of force is based in that training that all receive at the academy.
That's great. The second is, I like how we were talking about involving and hearing from the Falls Church community, but clearly we have members outside of the city of Falls Church that interact with our police department. So as we think about how to get feedback, let's make sure that we reach beyond our borders, because clearly we'll have input from people who come in our 2 square miles too. My third thought is around the budget. So as we've talked about before, and I think we've all fielded questions, the defund the police has been a very prevalent kind of call to action that I think many governments are facing. What I suggested when we discussed this last week is, instead of kind of responding to that and saying, yes, we're going to defund the police, because I'm not sure that's actually the right end goal there, is I'd love to see us benchmark our police funding based on our population, our crime rate, and use that data to kind of rationalize whether we are funded appropriately or whether there's other places that merit more funding. It's not really use of force per se, but clearly gets at the same end goals to make sure that we're funding things in the right place.
Right. That's definitely where I will have finance involved.
Great. And then at the end, I like how we were presenting kind of the output, but in the spirit of kind of continuous improvement, which I've heard the chief talk about a lot, I want to make sure this is not just kind of a one-time thing where we create the task force, present the results in 90 days, which clearly is very ambitious and is important to do to make sure we take really concrete action. But how do we think about making this a continuous thing? Is it an every 6 months? Do we have a civilian board of some kind that manages this on an ongoing basis? Maybe that's one of those policies that we can consider going forward. But I'd love to make sure that this is not just a one-time effort and it's something that lives and endures beyond this task force that we charter next week.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with that. We've seen these types of initiatives in the past, but I think this is a new day. And I don't think that this activity or this initiative will fall by the wayside. I think there will be major changes throughout this country as far as public safety is concerned.
Great. And my last one is for Wyatt and the chief. I'm sure you guys are fielding more questions than we are, but I think for the sake of expediency and just so that the chief has less work to copy and paste, let's publish some FAQs of what are the questions that we're hearing the most of so that we can put them out there while this task force is working in the next 90 days.
Starla, I work with OCOM and make sure they have the larger bullet points that we've put out and, like you said, cut and paste into many of our messaging.
Thank you.
All right, other questions, comments?
Mr. Mayor, hi, Dave Snyder. May I?
Yes, please.
Comments and questions. First of all, thank you for excellent work, and I look forward to supporting this. I do have a couple questions. I guess the first one is under 8A and the discussion we just had, it suggests that the report may go beyond use of force policies, and to the extent that it requires additional services provided by the city, I would ask for a costing of that in case that's one of that sort of thing is a recommendation that comes out of this. Can I have your commitment that will be costing that sort of recommendation as part of your report to us?
Yes, you have my commitment on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Second point I want to make is that, and I think it's been underscored before, we've been working at this and look forward to improving it. And I would just ask our citizens to interact with us. We encourage as much participation as possible. I think one of the things you'll see when you do that is that we have been working at this a long time and that we have long taken it seriously. We're not coming to this issue recently. We've been working at it, I think, ever since Chief Gavin came in. We've been working at it, and frankly, improvement is always possible, so I look forward to doing that. Finally, I want to stress the importance of an effective policing function that protects everyone, and I do mean everyone in the community. The fact of the matter is there are still mass shooters out there. There are still people who engage in violent activities. We still need the police to respond to motor vehicle crashes. We need the police to perform a lot of police functions. So in our effort to make sure that we have the very best policing possible, for me, it will be critical that we not reduce the protection for all of us that are that is fundamental to the policing function. So I would just make those points. And again, thank everyone. I look forward to moving forward on this, engaging our community, and seeing and actually implementing where improvements are possible. Mr. Mason, do you have any comments to any of that?
No, sir. I just look forward to working with you on these. And again, you have my commitment on these.
Thank you, sir.
All right, other comments or questions?
I've got a couple comments.
Sure, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff and Chief Gavin and Steve for coming together. What I will say is very quickly in light of what's been happening. I have certainly looked at Falls Church as a place that provides an opportunity to lead on issues like this, and I think that you guys are doing exactly that. And to echo some of the comments that have been made by previous council members, I think that our police department has done a fantastic job of helping lead in that regard and being progressive and always listening. So I commend you guys for doing this and certainly welcome any type of improvement that we can make. I think we do a great job, but we can always be better. One recommendation I would make after doing a lot of reading as it relates to some of the issues that have been brought to light over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think just engagement with the community from a more personal standpoint. I know Camden did this with new police officers that are hired, going door to door, meeting with neighbors. I know that is time intensive and resource intensive, and it doesn't have to be done on mass scale. But I've always found that face-to-face communication, getting to know your neighbors, regardless of your position and your employment in this city, goes a long way to helping folks understand your mission and also mitigate any potential issues in the future. And so I would ask that we look at our community outreach, not just getting folks together from a think tank perspective, but also just being out there interacting with folks and getting to know our neighbors. We're small enough to do that. And I think it's one of those areas where we can lead. But again, I commend you guys for doing this, and we just ask that community outreach and getting to know our community, because we're small enough and agile enough to do that, be a central tenet in this effort. So thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lichtenhouse. Other comments, questions?
I have some comments, Mr. Mayor.
Of course, Vice Mayor Conley, please.
Yes. So I want to say thank you to Mr. Mason for this very thorough start. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is lay out the process and how it's all going to work. So I appreciate this. I second Ms. Hardy's suggestion that we have some FAQs available, because I'm starting to feel guilty every time I have to send Chief Gavin a question, knowing that she's going to spend so much time responding to each question. So it would be great if there were some FAQs that we could have there as a quick and easy answer. And then there are some questions that people now have sent in like twice. Like, what's the percentage of time officers spend in their vehicles versus walking around in the community? And I'm not sure that this group will get to that kind of data, but those questions are out there. So I'm not sure if we need to have another separate data list that's on the FAQs or something like that. Some of the other statistics and data that I hope that we could cover would be, the spending in the police and sheriff's department versus spending in health and human services, and what's the difference and why. And also the spending of our law enforcement departments versus communities of the same size or per capita, which we did say that would be covered there. And then several weeks ago, I mentioned just statistics in the courtroom, who's coming to court, who's not coming to court, what's the racial makeup of the people that have tickets, that are able to pay their tickets and not come to court, because I think that is another really important measure of our community, of who is in the courtroom and how are they seeing Falls Church on a really tough day in their lives. And again, I don't know that fits into the use of force policy and review, but it is something that we should review. I would ask on the makeup of the committee, could we have a schools representative? Because I know the police department interacts a lot with the school community, especially with juveniles that have come in contact with the law or kids in school that are having trouble. So I think it would be good to include someone from the school community on there. And
Excellent idea.
then as far as the city council each appointing one person, we've never done it that way before. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around how that would work.
I was told that earlier.
But that doesn't mean we can't do it that way.
Right.
Typically, we have people apply and then they're interviewed and then we select them out of that large group. So I'm just wondering how that would work, and we would make sure that we do get a diverse strata of the community and not people that we happen to know that live on our street.
Well, again, that could be done through a call to the community in regards to soliciting information from them to include demographic information to make sure that we are getting a cross section of the representatives of this community.
Right. I wonder though if it might be better if we did the typical interview process, the appointments committee interview process, so that we have the whole pool all together, so that each council member isn't responsible for finding a person.
I have no problem with looking at that and making that part of this process.
Okay. I don't know. Others may feel like this, and I'm sure it has worked fine because you wouldn't have put it in there if it hadn't worked fine someplace else. I don't know how others feel about that, but that did make me a little nervous. How are we going to make that actually happen by June 30th?
I agree with your concern. It's hard to make up a group that is a complementary and holistically when you're just sort of looking at one piece. And I do share your concern, Vice Mayor Connolly. So you were asking, I just thought I would share that as well.
Okay. And then my last thing is, when we're searching for community feedback, is there a thought that we would go to people who have been arrested or have had interaction with the police in the past specifically and ask them, or is it more of a general call to the community? What has been your experience in dealing with the police department?
I was looking at more of a general call to the community in regards to their interactions with the police.
Okay. Is it possible at all to reach out to people who have had interactions with the police directly?
Again, I don't see anything that would block us from doing that at all. The only question is whether or not they will, but
right.
Sure, we can consider that.
Right. Okay. Just to make sure, because some of those people may not respond to the general call to the community, but if they get an email or a letter saying, we know you've interacted with the Falls Church Police and what's your experience been? Do you have any stories to tell? You might get a really robust response because you're reaching out individually to people.
Okay.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
All right. Any other questions or comments? I've got one or two if no one else does. Let me ask you, I think I understand this, but I'm not sure I do. Okay. All our officers and from most of the officers from the region go through a regional police academy, do they not?
Correct. The Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy is the one that certifies officers in Virginia. So if they come from another jurisdiction, there isn't reciprocity. So they would have to go through the academy to set the foundation for police work in Virginia.
So, for example, if someone wants to be a Falls Church police officer, how much time do they spend at the regional academy about?
The regional academy, if I'm not mistaken, is 5 to 6 months at this time. Is that correct, Chief?
Yes, 14 weeks.
And then do we have our own training that we add on top of that?
Yes, sir. We have another additional 14 weeks of field training before they're cut loose. And we also have some in service that just gets them through the procedures, policies, and the, processes of our department.
So about 28 weeks total of training, of which half is regional and half is local. And so is what we're doing here in Falls Church, it seems like in some ways it's also applicable to what might be taught regionally. And I don't know if we may end up having different policies than are the regional trainers. Might that happen if we, for example, change our policies in light of or in response to the undertaking we're about to do?
I do believe that the academy right now is, actually, there's a call for all departmental, for use of force policies. So that may be easy for the committee just to get the 17 member agencies from our academies use of force for comparison. Our use of force, policy is going to be different than ones of another jurisdiction, yet the types of force that is taught at the academy is all the same, if that makes sense.
Sort of, but not exactly. So,
Okay.
in other words, are you taught at the academy, when to use certain force in certain instance? In other words, if this happens, you should use this level of force. Might we have different standards in Falls Church than the region does? In other words, no, we don't think we should use this level of force in this circumstance. I'm just trying to figure out, we don't want our officers to be taught conflicting ideas about use of force, either at the region or at the local level, right? I'm just trying to, I understand the academy is kind of one of the main parts where our folks get educated, and I just want to understand how our reexamination will jive with what's happening, and maybe there is a re-examination regionally that could happen as well. I don't know. I have not yet heard of that.
There are examples throughout the region that differ from our department. For instance, there are weapons that we have that others don't, or vice versa. There are types of tactics, like with driving tactics, that we would prohibit that other jurisdictions allow. So the academy is very general. It teaches you the general continuum of force or the types of force to be used in certain circumstances. When it gets to specific weapons, for instance, the police department has no lethal force option when it comes to shotguns. We use less than lethal force and ammunition for shotguns, where other jurisdictions have lethal force for a shotgun, just as an example. Or some departments may have tasers and others may not have tasers. So when we get to the local level, there are certain aspects of the force that are specifically trained depending on the department. So there may be some that are different, quite honestly. But the general use of force that was taught and is taught at the academy is the principles of when to use force and what type of force to be used depending on the circumstances. And it's responding to the threat before you. How is it that you respond to a threat of a man or a suspect with a knife? And that is in general across the board the same, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. Well, I tell you, it sounds like we've got plenty of way to go before we, need to reconcile any differences that may or may not arise. And so I think what we have before us is, a very good start. And Mr. Shields, is this going to come back to us next week, or how does this go forward?
What our intention is, Mayor, is to, with the input that we've gotten tonight, put this into the form of a resolution so that the City Council actually charters this group and then considers that at your next meeting on Monday next week. Okay.
Are there further questions from anyone? Any questions or comments? If not, we thank you all, Mr. Mason, Mr. Shields, Chief Gavin. We thank you all so much for the work you've done so far and look forward to furthering this important work. So thank you all. And why don't we move on to the next item then, which is the council schedule and council comments. Does anyone have any comments or scheduling questions or suggestions? All right.
I had some questions.
Can you go back to the schedule? Can you show the schedule again, Cindy?
Sure.
Vice Mayor Conley?
No, go ahead, Letty, I just want to look at while Letty asks her questions.
Okay. Wyatt, I think several of us received questions about 515 East Broad, which is on the Planning Commission's docket and not ours. Is that something you can update us on or respond to the concerns?
We have gotten a number of questions, and we'll get responses back to all those questions. One of the ones, just as an example, so what is proposed is a 4-lot subdivision of the parcel that is next to the Doolin Church. And so one of the questions that we've gotten is, how is it that you could have a 4-lot pipe stem subdivision? And the answer to that is that only 2 of the lots, 2 of the 4 are pipe stems. The other 2 front directly on Broad Street. I think the staff review is that the application is fully compliant with the zoning ordinance and with the subdivision ordinance. And but there were a couple other questions, and I don't recall the particulars on those, but we will get responses back to the citizens that have asked those.
I think one of the neighbors who had contacted me said they only got their letter last week, and the Planning Commission is acting this Wednesday. And so I didn't know if that was within our normal process or whether there was a delay in mail or something had happened.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I have not yet gotten the answer to, but notice is a very clear legal requirement, and so the Planning Commission cannot take action if the legal notice is, if the notice has not been done according to code. That's a very clear requirement. I just don't recall exactly what those specifications are.
Okay, thank you. My second one related to a topic we talked about last week, which was CARES money, and I think Wyatt, the plan to bring in front of council kind of a plan in July on how we might appropriate the remaining $1 million.
That's right.
So as the schools start ramping up kind of their reopening conversation, and then we've talked about testing a lot here, have we talked about the intersection of the two? Because clearly testing could be part of that reopening strategy. And should some of the city $1 million go towards helping the schools figure out how to reopen safely? Because as I've said before, I think tying education and economy reopening is really important. Really can't really reopen the economy until the schools are functioning in some way. And so I'd certainly be willing to have a conversation about what the needs there are, especially knowing that our schools only got $13,000 from the Fed.
Yes, so the short answer is we have been having these discussions with the school administration. And there is a Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday where CARES money will be one of the agenda items. To date, we have not yet gotten any proposals from the schools on the use of CARES funds. And one of the things they're struggling with is that they have, they are going to be given direction from the state superintendent on how to do this. And so in some respects, they're going to have to follow that plan. And so one of the questions is, suppose we had just a much better testing regimen using CARES fund than anyone else in the state. Could we do things differently? And I think the answer is no. We have to follow basically what the state plan is. That's what I've been told sort of by a local school staff. We did have and Mayor Tarter can speak to this as well, the state superintendent of schools was on the regional call today, and Vice Mayor Beth Connolly and Mayor Tarter were on that call. And he kind of gave an overview of what that strategy will be. And I think the basic plan is going to be that the state will have sort of the baseline plan that everyone is going to need to follow, and then certain jurisdictions can be stricter than the state plan. So how that would factor into, suppose we had a more robust testing program or other public health things that we put our monies to, could we actually have a more open plan for schools? It sounds like we can't. That's our read of the situation right now, but more to come on that. I think the state superintendent's plan was just sent out to the superintendents recently, and it's being reviewed very closely right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so my understanding of the call today was that that we could have a kind of stricter that the state, as I understand it, is not going to mandate what we do per se as a school system, but establish some baselines. We can be stricter if we would like, but each local jurisdiction's plan needs to be sent to Richmond for their review and approval. So I understand that there would be flexibility in what Falls Church and other jurisdictions might do. So I think if there are ideas from the schools and how they might do testing and the like, I think that's certainly something worth exploring.
I guess the broader question is, from a testing supply, are we still, I mean, clearly we're at a place where you still go to your primary care physician or you go to one of the CVS clinics, but we don't have enough testing supply that anyone and everybody can get tested, right?
That is correct. Mass testing is basically where it's been, where I've been reporting.
And is that controlled at this level? So I imagine that they may want to divvy up, when we do ramp up supply, hopefully we will, that I imagine they might want to manage where they send it to the higher need areas? Or is it something that locally we have some control of?
Well, some jurisdictions are purchasing their own locally, so not going through the state or through individual, health departments of which multiple jurisdictions might be a part. But Arlington, for example, to my understanding, is purchasing their own, testing for their own uses. And so I believe we could do that if we so desired.
Okay. And then a schedule question. Now we have the schedule up. So July 1st is when we have all those new laws that go into effect from the state. And the one we've talked about in the past is the firearm one. I know Carol sent out an update on where we were with that task group. Do we think we can get it scheduled in time or as close to July 1 so that it becomes in effect when we actually have that authority from Richmond?
I think there's just so much going on right now that I think that's going to be difficult. I also think that most of the other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, with the exception of Alexandria, have not really tackled this yet. So, July 1, it does not seem doable. We do have our task force that has been working, and I've just received kind of an initial report from them right prior to this meeting. But I need to get a little bit caught up on kind of what work they've been doing. But we can certainly schedule time to meet with the city council. I do think we, from the beginning, we have wanted to try to have these regulations be, to the best extent possible. We have to see what the others do, but to have them as uniform as possible. Well, I guess uniformity seems like a preferable approach than a lot of diversity in these regulations. And so I don't think Fairfax or Arlington, to the best of my knowledge, have produced their draft ordinances yet. But I'm going to read this report, and I could be incorrect in that, and I just need to catch up a little bit on it.
Okay, that's fair. Looking at the schedule, it doesn't look feasible to get in before July 1, but if we can at least add it to the to be scheduled so we don't lose it, it's just been such a long-standing priority for us that I want to make sure we do implement something.
Yes, understood.
Then last, I guess, Mary Beth, do you want to talk about the petition and the work you're leading?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. Do you want to talk about yours first, or should we?
Well, you can start first because I didn't get dovetails.
Okay. So I was going to ask about the firearms ordinance, so thank you for covering that one, Ms. Hardy. City Council, there's a petition coming to City Council. I don't know if we've gotten it yet, but Eric Pelton, who is on the EDA and a member of our business community, put a petition on change.org, which is a call to examine the full history of the founding of the City of Falls Church and its schools. And he goes on to ask for to shine a light on what is the true story of the founding of Falls Church, and the good and the bad, and how can we learn from that and move forward and make our community a better place. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, but so many people know so many different pieces of this history. So what I've done is pull together a group of people who know the history and I've been working with Nikki Henderson on this. There's some historians of some of our churches I have history teachers at Thomas Jefferson and George Mason High School involved, as well as other community members that are knowledgeable about the history of Falls Church. Ron Anzalone from the Historical Commission, Jenny Carolyn Marshall Webster from the library, and Corey Janicelli from the Cherry Hill Farmhouse. So I'm going to pull all these people together at a meeting on Thursday afternoon to talk about how we can put forth a panel discussion that will lay out all the history of our community from an expert standpoint. I actually wanted to do the presentation on Thursday, and then Ron Anzalone, the thoughtful historian, said, no, that would be foolish. You need to have some time to pull this together and do it correctly, and he is right. So the question that I'm going to ask this group to tackle is, how do we look back at our history, learn from it, and then act now for a better future? And hopefully out of this panel, which will be later this summer, they'll be able to present the story, have people engage with that story, understand the story, and then say, what can we do to improve what we have now? And that would go to the mural project that Tinner Hill has asked us to fund. How can we use the mural project to tell part of that story? How can the schools do a better job of incorporating it in the curriculum? How can our local history room have a display that's there all the time? And so that project is going to start, and I'm going to work on that over the summer. And then Ms. Hardy also had a project that is very similar.
Yes, I think coming out of, obviously, the past 2 weeks, everyone has a desire to kind of take action. And so in talking with a couple of neighborhood friends who all happen to actually serve on various boards and commissions, we actually came together over the weekend for kind of a socially distant, nerdy policy talk, I guess. So we had a member from the Planning Commission, the CACT, Housing, the EDA. We had a housing policy expert who happened to be a good neighbor and a friend. The League When Voters was represented. So it was really diverse and just really amazing to see all these people want to take action, given what we know about our history, looking at our demographics, and really wanting to double down on our commitment around diversity. And so some of it's a lot of the ideas we talked about, how do we improve our diversity, but really focus on housing policy is where a lot of the energy seemed. So I know that we just had redone this past year the housing chapter, and there's some work underway, but I think related to what Mary Beth talked about, I think there's a big desire in the community to talk about how do we actually really live up to our values. So we say we want to be welcoming and diverse community by the year 2040. If you look at our actual demographics, we're probably not there. Are we actually owning kind of a lot of the past kind of segregationist policies that occurred in the city, and how do we make up for it going forward? And so we may have actually received a couple petitions as well around an idea of creating kind of a racial equity or social equity commission. Another thought is it could be wrapped up within the housing commission if they're willing to take this on and kind of really look back at the housing chapter and figure out where can we actually increase efforts and funding to actually make more progress in that area. Sorry, my computer is freezing. Are y'all still there?
We are, yes.
Yes.
So did you have more, or are you done?
Update of where that group stood. It was meant to be an informal conversation, and I think the big action item coming out of that was that people were thinking that a good way to mobilize and really elevate the conversation was to have a task force or a commission focused on racial equity, especially as it relates to our housing policies. And so I think a question for council is, number one, is it something that we'd like to charter? Two, do we want to ask the Housing Commission to take it on? If not, a new task force. I know that clearly we've got a lot of new commissions and efforts underway right now too.
All right, thank you. Thoughts?
Mr. Mayor, hi, Dave Snyder. So since my first foray into public service here was as president of the Falls Church Housing Corporation, I've long had an interest in housing policy. I would be interested if Councilmember Hardy could give us a written proposal. So I'm very interested in taking a look at that and potentially acting on it, number one. Number two, I do want to put out a yellow flag, if you will. those of us who lived through the financial crisis realize that the worst budget years were not the year of the crisis, but the succeeding 2 or 3 years. We heard a report last week that some of our revenue is at the worst case. So as we continue to work on these issues, it seems to me one of the things we have to keep in mind is the financial context in which we're now operating for reasons which were beyond our control. Other than that general request, it seems like an interesting initiative. Secondly, for those who want to take a direct action, if you will, I'm fortunate to say that my church at New York Avenue and 13th and 14th Street takes direct action in support of the protesters, and we're always looking for volunteers. So anyone who's interested, please let me know, because that's literally where the action is, and it's been a great honor for me to be able to participate in that. So just a general request, if anyone's interested in direct social action, please let me know, and I'll look forward to connecting you in that way. Those are only the general comments I want to make, but just to kind of say from experience, the next couple of years are going to be dreadfully difficult for ways in which we can't even imagine right now. And so let us move forward together, but realize the financial context in which all of this is unfolding. Thanks much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Other comments?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Duncan.
I've been out of town on family business for a couple of weeks, so if others know the answers to these questions, I'm sorry, I'll try to be quick. Wyatt, I think these are for you. What's the status of the West Falls proposal and council's plans for discussing it in the summer?
Thank you, Councilmember Duncan. We have received a special exception site plan. The staff review is happening right now. We are planning a presentation to the City Council on July 6th. And we will ask, actually, and we can discuss this, but our request of council is to receive this briefing on the 6th and on the 13th to refer it out to boards and commissions. And the reason for that quick turnaround is that the council is going to be the final approval of this SESP, and we would submit that the council gets the last say in it, but it would be very beneficial for the council to get the benefit of board and commission review sooner rather than later in the process. So it's a little bit of a quicker turnaround than we've done on SESP, special exceptions in the past, but because the council has already set the basic terms for the project, really this is a process to get board and commission input on the details and the site plan.
Okay, sounds good to me. Second, you sent a memo out Friday about the Insight proposal for Broad Washington and the staff's conversations, particularly about the public parking land portion of it. And in that, you said that we might want to have a closed session on that. Is that something that we'd be planning for July? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, as soon as we can practically schedule it, and I'll just need to follow up, with offline with the council on scheduling that. But we'd like to do that as quick as we practically can.
Okay. Third question: what's the status of City Hall and our prospects for returning to meeting in person again? Is that on your consideration agenda?
Well, our city clerk has actually convened us to sort of begin to think through how we would do that, and so maybe I'll defer that to the clerk. I will just note for City Hall is open in a limited way to the public, access to the permits counter, treasurer, and commissioner, and of course we'll be holding court in this building on Wednesday, July 8th. Our first welcoming back of the judges in court. So I think it's a good point of discussion about what the council's preference is for moving back into in-person meeting. And if council could give us some guidance on your thinking on that. We are in phase 2 right now. The limit on gatherings is at 50. And the governor has intimated that phase 3 will likely be in 2 to 4 weeks is what technically the governor has stated.
And what's the gathering limit in phase 3, or is there one?
I don't think he has really laid out the details yet for phase 3, so I don't know.
Okay. Okay, well, I would love to see us get back into meeting in person if that's, safe and legal. If the court's going to be holding court in July, that's certainly something to aim for, I would say. Last thing, the schedule for the Economic Development Committee would have us meeting on Thursday, June the 25th. So I would just like to float that date out here at this meeting for Letty and Ross as to whether that meeting date would be okay for you, and if so, what time. I'd prefer to do it a little earlier that day if possible, 9 o'clock-ish. But we can talk about that further. I just wanted to float it here while we're all together. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Any other comments? And remember, we do have a closed session immediately upon this conclusion of this portion of our meeting. Any additional comments?
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, computer's still freezing.
Are you talking?
The computer's lagging, so every time I click it actually unmutes me later. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Again, yeah.
West Falls Church, you mentioned why sending that to boards and commissions in July, that a lot of our boards don't meet in the summer. Is there a timeline that we need to hear back from them to keep the project on track?
Let me defer that question to Carly Aubrey, who's on the call.
Good evening. So we have, most of them meet in July, so I think we can get to most of them. There are 3 that will technically be pre-referral, but I think it will still be good to get the presentation in front of them since it's not anticipated to change. And actually the developer plans to do a video that we can then share with all the groups, especially if we're still going to be with doing these virtual meetings. That way everybody's getting the same presentation. So the only group that's going to be difficult is Rec and Parks, because they don't meet typically in July or August. I've had some preliminary conversations with Danny on a potential special meeting, but that still needs to be talked about more. But ideally, if we can get in front of all of them in July, then we have a potential deadline for their comments July 31st. But this is all still tentative and based on if it gets referred out.
So we would prefer to hear back from everyone by August.
Yes,
track.
Ideally. Mm-hmm.
And then I just got an email from someone asking me about camps. Wyatt, so I think we had advertised that we would notify people what we're doing with July camps by June 15th, which is today. Was there a decision?
So what I do know is that I'll need to get a fuller response to you. We are doing summer fun playground program, and that'll be a limited and a modified program. But the full camp program, I need to get back with you on the details of that.
I just looked at the website and said we'll notify by no later than June 15th. So
okay.
Some parents at least may be waiting.
Okay.
We still have 2 hours.
Sometimes those notifications are by the direct, people who are on our listservs, but I don't know what that communication was. I'll need to get back with you.
All right, what else do we have? Should we head on into closed session then? Are you all ready to go into closed session?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and read a motion, and then we'll see where we go from there. So upon a motion made by council member
Snyder.
and seconded by council member
Connolly.
Connolly, and passed by a vote of city council, council went in a closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A7 for purposes of consultation with legal counsel, where such consultation would adversely affect the negotiating position of city council, specifically for the discussion of creation of a community development authority to serve the development proposed at the West End property. Councilmember Connolly.
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan.
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy. She's a maybe.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. The computer
Okay.
issue again.
All right, Councilmember Hardy, is that a yes?
She did say yes before she muted herself, and I saw her nod her head.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. If it's anything different, let me know. Councilmember Lichtenhouse.
Yes.
Councilmember Snyder.
Yep.
Councilmember Z.
Yes.
All right, Councilmember Tartar, yes. Okay, so we are now in closed session. I'm going to ask the clerk, what do we need to do and how long a break should we take to ensure we're in closed session?
Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, this is Cindy. I would just say, give me 3 minutes. I want to go confirm with the TV crew that you're off as if you'd been here, and I'll come back and confirm in just a moment.
All right, I'm going to step away for just a
2 minutes
moment.
minimum, unless you want a longer break.
Why don't we just say at 10 o'clock, 4 minutes from now, we'll reconvene.
Confirmed.
All right. All right, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and read a motion to come out of closed session upon a motion made by Councilmember
Duncan.
seconded by Councilmember
Connolly.
and passed by a vote of City Council. Council reconvene in open session. Councilmember Connolly,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Lichtenhouse,
Yes.
Snyder.
Yes.
I believe Mr. Z has left the call.
Correct.
And Tartar, yes. So this is now, it is 11:20. And the certification upon a motion made by Councilmember
Duncan.
and seconded by Councilmember
Connolly.
Connolly, and passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session, it was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session or meeting by the body. Councilmember Connolly,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Lichtenhouse,
Yes.
Snyder,
Yes.
Z is absent. Tartar, yep. Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about tonight?
Mr. Mayor, just a quick note about the Supreme Court's decision on rights for all Americans and how the city has been such a strong supporter. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any last words from anyone? All right, how about we're adjourned? Do you want to do that?
Adjourn.
All right, let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you.